When the car spun out on that rainy highway, I thought the worst part of my night would be the pain of broken bones. But nothing cut deeper than discovering where my husband chose to be while I lay in that hospital bed, praying he would walk through the door. My name is Tanya. I'm 30 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you I was living the kind of life every little girl dreams of. A nice house in the suburbs, a good job I loved, a husband I believed was devoted to me, and weekends filled with brunches and movie nights. From the outside, it looked picture perfect, almost nauseatingly so. But the night of my accident shattered that illusion into tiny glass pieces that cut me deeper than any wound on my body. It started as a normal Tuesday evening. I had stayed late at work finishing up reports. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers and the faint drizzle tapping against the windows. I remember checking my phone and seeing a message from my husband, Mark. He told me he might grab dinner with a friend after his meeting. Nothing unusual in the wording, but something about it made my chest tighten. Still, I didn't respond. I just packed up, told myself not to overthink, and drove into the stormy night. The rain had picked up while I was inside. It was one of those downpours where the wipers move furiously, but visibility still feels like looking through frosted glass. The roads glistened with slick reflections, streetlights bending in puddles. I gripped the wheel tighter, focusing on the lines, reminding myself I'd driven this route home 1,000 times. But life doesn't give you warnings, doesn't tap you on the shoulder before it rips the ground out from under your feet. I don't remember much about the moment itself. One second I was adjusting the defroster. The next I felt the tires slide. My car spun, the screech of metal against asphalt filling my ears, headlights flashing as I crossed lanes. The impact when I slammed into the guardrail was deafening, a shudder that rattled through my bones. Airbags burst out like suffocating pillows, glass shattered across my arms, and the world narrowed to pain and confusion. When I opened my eyes again, there was a strange silence, like the world had paused. My chest ached, my legs were pinned, and every breath came out sharp. I reached for my phone, shaking, fumbling through broken glass on the passenger seat. My first instinct wasn't to call 911. It was to call Mark. He was my husband, my anchor, my person. And in that moment of terror, I just wanted him. The phone rang, and I whispered his name like it might conjure him beside me. But instead of picking up, it went to voicemail. I tried again, and again. Each time the call went unanswered. Finally, with tears mixing with rain leaking in through the cracked window, I dialed emergency services. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and oxygen masks, paramedics cutting open my sleeve to check for fractures. I drifted in and out of consciousness, asking over and over if they'd called my husband. They promised they had. I clung to that like a lifeline, imagining him waiting at the ER doors, panicked but ready to hold my hand. But when they wheeled me into the hospital, the waiting room was empty. No familiar face rushing forward, no arms pulling me close. Just fluorescent lights, antiseptic smells, and nurses focused on their tasks. I told myself maybe traffic was bad, maybe he was on his way. Hours passed as they set my broken arm, stitched cuts across my forehead, and ran scans for internal injuries. My phone buzzed once, finally, a text from Mark. Busy with dinner? Can't talk now. Are you okay? My blood ran cold. Dinner? I stared at the screen, disbelief knotting in my stomach. I typed back with trembling fingers, car accident. In hospital. Where are you? He didn't reply. The nurse glanced at me, probably reading the devastation on my face, but she didn't ask. She just adjusted my IV and told me to rest. But how could I? Every second stretched into an eternity as I lay there, alone, staring at the door that refused to open. By the time Mark finally arrived, well past midnight, I had already cycled through anger, fear, and exhaustion. He strolled in wearing a crisp button-up, the faint scent of wine and perfume clinging to him. No panic, no guilt etched on his face, just annoyance like he was the one inconvenienced. "Babe," he said, leaning against the wall. "Why didn't you call me earlier?" I couldn't even find words. My throat was raw, not just from the oxygen mask, but from the scream I wanted to unleash. "I did," I whispered. "I called, I texted, I begged." He shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I was at dinner. Couldn't just walk out. Dinner." While I lay strapped to a gurney, praying I wasn't bleeding internally, my husband chose fine dining with someone else. And in that sterile hospital room, something inside me shifted. The trust I'd built over years cracked like the windshield of my car. I closed my eyes, letting silent tears slide down my cheeks, and for the first time, I saw Mark for who he really was. Not my protector, not my partner. Just a man who had already chosen where his loyalties lay. And it wasn't with me. But I didn't know then that the police would soon get involved. I didn't know his dinner companion wasn't just a friend, and that the lies he spun would unravel faster than either of us expected. All I knew was that the woman who left that hospital bed would never be the same as the one who had stepped into her car hours before. I didn't sleep that night. The pain meds dulled the sharp edges of my broken arm, but nothing could numb the storm in my chest. Mark had gone home after barely an hour in the hospital. He muttered something about an early meeting, kissed the top of my head mechanically, and left me staring at the ceiling in disbelief. I kept replaying his words, his shrug, the way he said I was at dinner, like that justified everything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flash of headlights, the spin of the car, the guardrail crumpling, and then the empty doorway where my husband should have been. By morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Trauma makes you sensitive. Maybe he didn't understand how serious the accident had been. Maybe he thought I was exaggerating. But those excuses melted away when my nurse returned to check my vitals. She adjusted the IV, then hesitated, her eyes flicking toward me with something like pity. "Your husband left kind of quick last night," she said softly. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Yeah, he had things to do. She didn't push. She just gave me that look nurses must practice, the one that says I know you're hurting in more ways than one, but you have to say it out loud first. I couldn't. Not yet. Later that day, my sister Hannah came to see me. She rushed in like a whirlwind of perfume and worry, dropping her purse on the chair and grabbing my uninjured hand. Hannah was 2 years younger than me, louder, more direct, the kind of person who would pick a fight with a stranger in a grocery line if they looked at her wrong. She gasped when she saw my stitched forehead, then glared at me like I had done it on purpose. "Tanya, oh my God, are you okay? What the hell happened?" I told her everything, the rain, the spin, the crash. She squeezed my hand tighter with each detail. But when I mentioned Mark's absence, her face hardened. "He didn't show up until midnight?" I nodded. "And he smelled like perfume?" Again, I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Hannah let out a sharp laugh, but it wasn't funny. It was bitter, angry, unbelievable. "You nearly die and he's out whining and dining some woman? Do you even know who she is?" "No," I admitted, my voice cracking. "He just said it was a friend." "Friend, my ass," she muttered, pacing the room. "You deserve better than this, Tanya. You've always deserved better." Her words stung because they weren't new. Hannah had never trusted Mark. She called him slick, too polished, someone who liked the image of a perfect marriage more than the reality. I had defended him for years. Now lying in a hospital bed with dried blood on my hairline, I had nothing left to say. Hannah's fury must have shaken something loose, because by that evening, a police officer came by my room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of calm expression that makes you sit up straighter. He introduced himself as Officer Daniels and explained that they needed my statement for the accident report. I recounted everything as best as I could. The rain, the skid, the guardrail. He asked if I'd been drinking, if I'd been distracted. I told him no, swearing I had both hands on the wheel when the tires slipped. He nodded, jotting notes. But then he asked, almost casually, "Was anyone else in the car with you?" "No," I said. "I was alone." He tapped his pen against the clipboard. "Interesting. We had a witness call in. Said they saw another vehicle swerving near yours right before you hit the guardrail. A black sedan, tinted windows. You didn't notice anyone?" My stomach dropped. My accident wasn't just bad luck. The idea that another driver might have forced me off the road made my hands shake. "No," I whispered. "I didn't see anything." He gave me a reassuring nod. "We'll review traffic cams." "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll get to the bottom of it." After he left, I sat in silence, my heart pounding. A black sedan. Mark drove a black sedan. My breath hitched at the thought, but I shoved it away immediately. He wouldn't. He couldn't. It had to be a coincidence. 2 days later, I was discharged. Hannah picked me up, fussing over the wheelchair, making sure my discharge papers were in order. Mark was nowhere to be found. He claimed he had a critical presentation at work and couldn't take time off. As Hannah wheeled me toward her car, she muttered loud enough for the nurses to hear, "Some husband you've got, back at home." The house felt different. Colder. The framed wedding photos on the wall mocked me with their frozen smiles. Mark showed up that evening, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. "You should have told me when you were getting out," he said, tossing his keys on the counter. "I did," I replied flatly. "You didn't answer," he waved a dismissive hand. "I've been swamped." "You know how it is." I stared at him, searching for some crack in his mask, something to explain the distance between us. Instead, my eyes caught on his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, shielding the screen, then slipped it back without answering. The faint smile tugging at his lips told me all I needed to know. Whoever was on the other end mattered more than me. That night, as I lay in bed with my arm throbbing in its cast, I overheard him whispering in the hallway. His voice was low, urgent, almost tender. I strained to catch the words, but all I heard clearly was, "She doesn't know. I'll see you soon." The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay silent. I confronted him over breakfast, my spoon clattering against the bowl of cereal I couldn't bring myself to eat. "Who were you talking to last night?" I demanded. He froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Mark. I heard you." "Who is she?" His eyes narrowed, the mask slipping just enough to reveal irritation. "You're imagining things. Maybe the painkillers are messing with your head." That was his favorite tactic, gaslighting me, making me doubt my own senses. "But not this time." "I'm not crazy," I snapped. "You've been lying to me." "I can feel it." He slammed his spoon down, milk splashing across the table. "Fine, you want the truth?" "Yes, I was at dinner with someone. A colleague. A female colleague. But it's work, Tanya. Not everything is some scandal." "Work doesn't smell like perfume," I shot back. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might explode. Instead, he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out, muttering, "I don't have time for this." I sat there shaking, my cereal soggy and untouched, my heart splintering into pieces. I wanted to believe him, but every instinct screamed that he was hiding something bigger. 2 days later, Officer Daniels called. "Mrs. Harper," he said formally, We've reviewed the traffic cams from the night of your accident. We identified a black sedan near your vehicle moments before the crash. We traced the plates. The car is registered to your husband. The room spun. My cast felt heavier, suffocating. That can't be right, I stammered. I'd like you to come in to give a formal statement, Daniels continued. There are some inconsistencies we need to clear up. After the call, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, staring at the phone like it might give me different news if I looked hard enough. Mark's car. My husband's car. What was he doing near me on that highway? Was it really an accident? Or had he followed me? Pushed me? When Mark returned that evening, I couldn't look at him the same. Every smile felt sinister, every touch fake. He noticed my distance and frowned. What now? He asked, irritation lacing his voice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if he had tried to kill me, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I simply whispered, "The police know." His face paled, just for a split second, before he recovered. But I saw it, and that was all the confirmation I needed. The days that followed felt like I was living in someone else's skin. I went through the motions, taking my pain meds, forcing food down when Hannah hovered, pretending to rest, but inside I was spiraling. Every glance at Mark sent a chill through me. The man I thought I knew, the one I married, the one I had trusted with my life, was suddenly a stranger. Worse, he was a stranger I was terrified of. The morning after the police called, I woke up to the sound of Mark whistling in the kitchen. Whistling like everything was normal. I sat up in bed, my arm aching in its cast, and listened to the cheerful tune drifting down the hallway. It made my stomach turn. When I finally walked into the kitchen, he was flipping pancakes, smiling like we were a sitcom couple. "Morning, babe," he said, as though he hadn't been caught in a lie the size of a mountain. I leaned against the counter, watching him pour syrup onto a stack. "The police called," I said flatly. His hand paused, just for a second, then resumed. "Yeah? What about?" "They know you were on the highway the night of my accident," I whispered, my throat tightening. For the briefest moment, I saw fear flash across his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced with that smooth mask he wore so well. Of course I was. I was driving home from dinner. You know that. Then why didn't you say anything? My voice cracked. Why did you lie to me? He set the plate down with a clatter. Because you're hysterical, Tanya. You'd twist it into something it's not. I was nearby, big deal. That doesn't mean I caused your accident. The way he spat the word hysterical made my chest burn. I wanted to argue, to scream, but my body felt too fragile. I turned away, fighting tears. Later that afternoon, Hannah came by. She always had this sixth sense for when I needed her, like she could feel my pain before I even picked up the phone. She sat on the couch with me, scrolling through her phone, and then shoved it into my hand. "Look at this," she said. It was a picture. Mark, sitting in a fancy restaurant, leaning across the table toward a woman with long, dark hair. His hand was resting a little too close to hers. The timestamp was the night of my accident. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my hands trembling. "Friend of mine works there," Hannah said. "Sent it to me when she heard about your crash. Said she couldn't believe your husband was there, laughing it up with some woman while you were being rushed into the ER. My stomach dropped. The woman was beautiful in that polished, intimidating way. Expensive jewelry, designer dress, hair perfectly styled. She didn't look like a colleague. She looked like someone who had Mark's full attention. "Who is she?" I whispered. "That's what we're gonna find out," Hannah said firmly. That night, I confronted Mark again. He was sitting in the living room scrolling on his phone. I dropped the printed photo on the coffee table. His face went pale. "Explain this," I demanded. He stared at it, then at me. His jaw tightened. "You've been spying on me? Don't turn this around," I snapped. "Who is she?" "She's a client," he said smoothly. "Important account." I couldn't just leave in the middle of dinner. "That's all it was. You expect me to believe that?" My voice cracked. "You lied. You said it was a colleague. Now she's a client? Which is it?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're blowing this out of proportion. I've been under enough stress at work without you adding to it." "Stress?" I shot back, my chest heaving. "I almost died, Mark. I begged for you, and you chose her." For the first time, his mask slipped. His eyes hardened, his voice sharp. "Maybe if you weren't so needy, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for peace." The words sliced through me. I froze, staring at him, every muscle in my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to hit him. Instead, I just whispered, "Get out!" He sneered. "This is my house too, Tanya." Then he grabbed his keys and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Hannah pulled me into her arms when she came back later, and I let myself cry into her shoulder like a child. The next day, Officer Daniels called again. "Mrs. Harper, we need you to come down to the station. We've uncovered something important." My pulse quickened as Hannah drove me there. When we arrived, Daniels met us with a stack of papers and photos. He laid them out on the table one by one. Bank statements, receipts, surveillance stills. "Your husband wasn't just at dinner with this woman," Daniels said gravely. "He's been meeting her regularly. We believe she may be more than just a client." I stared at the photos, my stomach twisting. Mark smiling at her. Mark, his hand brushing hers. Mark kissing her cheek outside a hotel. My world crumbled. Daniels leaned forward. "And there's more. The black sedan that swerved near your car? We pulled traffic cam footage. It matches your husband's car exactly. Same plates. Same dent on the bumper," my breath caught. "So We can't prove intent yet," Daniels said carefully. "But it looks like he was following you that night. Whether he caused the skid or not, we're investigating. Do you feel safe at home?" The question hit me like a punch. Did I feel safe? With the man who had lied to me, cheated on me, possibly tried to kill me? "No," I whispered. That night I stayed at Hannah's. She insisted, and I didn't argue. Lying in her guest room, staring at the ceiling, I thought about every moment of my marriage. Every kiss, every promise, every whispered, "I love you." Had it all been a lie? Or had he loved me once, and then something changed? The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. "We need to talk. Stop involving the police. You'll regret it if you don't." My hands shook as I showed it to Hannah. "He's threatening me," I whispered. She snatched the phone, her eyes blazing. "Then we make sure he regrets it first." Over the next few days, the investigation deepened. Daniels called me in again, this time to show me a recorded statement from a waitress at the restaurant. She confirmed that Mark and the woman weren't discussing business at all. They were laughing, flirting, holding hands. "Her name is Vanessa Reed," Daniel said. "Divorced. Works in marketing. We're still digging into her background." Vanessa. The name made my stomach knot. I could picture her perfectly. The polished hair, the designer dress, the way Mark looked at her in those photos. I started piecing things together, moments that had never made sense before. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the way he guarded his phone like it was state property. He hadn't just betrayed me once. He had been betraying me for months. Maybe longer. One night, as Hannah and I sat in her kitchen, she poured me a glass of wine and said, "You know, Tanya, you don't have to play victim here. You can fight back. I looked at her, exhausted. How? He has all the power. The house, the money, the car. You have the truth, she said firmly. And once the police finish their investigation, he's the one who will lose everything. Her words planted a seed in me. For the first time since the accident, I felt something other than fear. I felt resolve. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make Mark pay. When the sun finally came up on the day my life began to change for good, it felt like the light was sharper, like someone had polished the world and shown me every flaw. The police called me early, asking me to come in again. Officer Daniels sounded tired but steady. He said they had enough to bring Mark in for questioning, and that Vanessa Reed had been cooperative once they found her. My stomach turned and a small part of me felt vindicated, but there was also a darkness underneath everything, a hollow that had nothing to do with legal victories. I wanted him held accountable, yes, but I also wanted to be the kind of person who could sleep at night without replaying his face, without hearing his voice in my head telling me I was hysterical. The interrogation room at the station smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. Mark sat across from me, hands folded, the same smooth posture he wore in photos with me smiling at wedding receptions and holiday dinners. But something in him looked smaller now, as if the lights in this room had revealed a man who had been propped up by image rather than substance. Vanessa sat to the side, her expression unreadable. She had been pale when they brought her in, hair pulled back, eyes swollen as though she might break into tears at any moment. I watched her closely. She looked like someone who had stepped into a life that had spiraled away from them. Officer Daniels explained the situation plainly. They had enough footage to show Mark had been near my car, that his sedan had matched the footage, and that he and Vanessa had been seen together multiple times, including the night of my accident. There were inconsistencies in his statements, and his phone records showed calls and texts to Vanessa in the hours before and after my crash. They needed to hear from him. The room was quiet, the hum of the building a background soundtrack to the way my heart pounded. When Mark spoke, his voice was measured. I was nearby, he said. I saw her car. I tried to catch up to see if she needed help. I didn't force her off the road. It was a bad storm. I regret that she was hurt. I didn't mean for this to happen. His words were crafted to sound contrite without admitting guilt. Officer Daniels pressed harder. Why were you on that stretch of highway at that time? Why were you following Ms. Reed's car? He shifted, discomfort flickering across his features. We were arguing about work. I wanted to talk. I followed her because she was driving erratically. I didn't touch her vehicle. I didn't cause the crash. Vanessa's statement was soft, and when she spoke, I heard how torn she was. She told them that she and Mark had been having an affair, that they had been meeting for weeks. She said that on the night of the accident they had been at dinner, and that Mark had insisted on following her afterwards because she seemed upset and distracted. She claimed she had not seen him near my car, that she had no idea how my vehicle had lost control. Sometimes her voice broke and she covered her mouth with her hand. I felt a strange empathy for her. She had made choices that hurt me, yes, but I could see the remorse in her eyes like little cracks forming in a mirror. Officer Daniels kept both of them talking, asking the kinds of questions that pry out the truth slowly, like a dentist easing out a root. He asked about timelines, about the restaurant bill timestamps, about traffic cams farther down the road. Piece by piece, they assembled the night. The more they talked, the more the story that painted itself across the table looked less like an accident and more like a catastrophe born of selfishness and cowardice. Mark's phone showed a sudden route change that matched traffic cams showing his car passing my location. There was a gap in his statements that the footage could not fill with anything but an uncomfortable truth. A detective who had come in halfway through the interviews asked a question that made my stomach drop. Do you have any reason to suspect Ms. Reed's relations with Mr. Harper were leveraged to influence him? Any financial entanglements, gifts, anything? Vanessa looked at Mark, then down at her hands. She admitted she had been lavished with gifts, expensive dinners paid for by Mark, trips she initially called business-related, but the credit card receipts told a different story. The detective asked if Mark had ever threatened or pressured her into seeing him, and she said no, but she looked defeated when she said it. The entire time, I sat there like a spectator at my own funeral, hearing things unfold that had been happening out of sight for months. In the days that followed, the press caught wind of the investigation. I had hesitated about contacting them at first, but when a reporter called with probing questions about Mark's involvement, it felt like a release valve. I agreed to a statement that said I trusted the legal process and wanted the truth to come out. A few headlines later, my inbox filled with messages from old friends, distant relatives, people offering support, and people wanting to know every sordid detail. The exposure was ugly, but it also made me breathe. There is power in truth when it is shared. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a woman with an efficient haircut and a voice that made you feel like you were being treated fairly without a single flinch. She told me they were considering charges for reckless endangerment and for actions that could be construed as attempted harm. The decision rested on whether Mark's actions had an element of intent or gross negligence. It was terrifying to think about the legal world dissecting my life, but I also felt relieved that a neutral system had begun to peel back the lies. Mark and Vanessa both retained attorneys. They began to posture legally, threats and counters and offers that tried to make this into a bargaining chip. Vanessa at one point reached out to me through a mediator and asked to meet. I almost refused, imagining every humiliation, but Hannah insisted I go. She wanted me to see the woman who had been at the center of this. She said seeing her would help me close a loop, whatever that meant. The cafe where we met had soft light and a hum of quiet conversation. Vanessa arrived with red eyes and a paper cup cradled in her hands like a lifeline. I sat across from her and felt my heart beating like a trapped bird. It was awkward at first. We spoke in the polite way strangers speak about the weather. Then she told me parts of the story I had not known. She spoke of how Mark had told her his marriage was over, how he painted a picture of me as distant and cold. She said she had been lonely after her divorce, flattered by attention from someone so polished and so convincing. She told me she wished she had never met him. I listened and felt no joy from her regret. It felt hollow because regret that comes after damage cannot always fix what it broke. You should have called me, I told her finally. You should have known better. She looked down. I thought I was in love, she said. I thought he loved me. The simplicity of her answer landed on me like lead. There was no excuse left. Love does not excuse breaking another person. Court proceedings took months. There were witness statements and expert testimonies about driving behavior in wet conditions, toxicology reports, and more footage that placed Mark near the site at specific times. What gripped me most was when former friends of his were subpoenaed and told small, sharp truths about his character. People spoke of his charm and his way of making himself look indispensable. They talked about how he prioritized his image and how easily he slid from one narrative to another. Each testimony chipped away at the version of Mark the one had loved. One afternoon, the prosecutor showed me a trove of messages that made me feel like my life had been vandalized in ink. Mark's texts to Vanessa were explicit and coy and sometimes cruel in how they manipulated reality. In one message he wrote, "I love that you are mine when she does not see you." The words made me cold. How many moments of my life had been accompanied by his lips forming the same lies? The prosecutor said plainly that while those messages did not necessarily prove he had caused the accident, they proved motive and pattern. They showed intent to prioritize the affair, to hide his tracks, to control the narrative. When it finally went to trial, I sat in the courtroom in a dress I barely recognized, feeling like a tourist in my own life. The prosecutor painted a picture of a man who had been following a path he thought would bring him pleasure without consequences, who had used his car and his privilege to keep secrets, and who had, by his actions, endangered someone close to him. The defense tried to argue coincidence, bad weather, and circumstantial evidence. They called experts who spoke of hydroplaning and unfortunate timing. It was a battle of plausible stories, and I realized then how truth is often a matter of which story has witnesses and which story is private. On the stand, I testified about the night, about the look of his face when he arrived at the hospital, about the text messages, and about the small betrayals that had stacked over time until they became a mountain. I felt naked, but I also felt fierce. There was a fire in me that no one could put out. I wanted him to see what he had taken from me. But mostly I wanted the world to know that the woman in that hospital bed had been wronged. When the verdict came down, the room seemed to tilt. Mark was found guilty on a charge of reckless endangerment. It was not the same as premeditated harm, but it was a legal recognition that his behavior put someone at serious risk. The judge handed down a sentence that included probation, community service, and a requirement to attend counseling and to pay restitution for the damages and medical bills. It was not perfect justice. Some part of me wanted a harsher punishment, but at the end, the state had acknowledged he was responsible for damaging my life. Vanessa did not testify against him in the end, but she cooperated with the investigation. After the trial, she reached out with a letter that read like an apology and a plea for forgiveness. I read it once and then folded it into a drawer. Forgiveness felt like a private currency I did not yet have to spend. When the trial ended, the house felt different. Mark moved out, claiming his mental health needed space. He rented a small apartment and kept insisting he had been caught up in a relationship that had clouded his judgment. He sent messages asking for reconciliation, for another chance, for time to prove he'd changed. I read them, then deleted them. The idea of him near me again turned my stomach. In the months that followed, I had to rebuild fragments of my life. My body healed slowly. The physical pain receded into a scar that sometimes ached with the seasons, but the emotional work was a different kind of rehabilitation. I started seeing a therapist recommended by the court, a woman named Dr. Patel, who helped me navigate the fog. She taught me that healing could be messy and nonlinear, that being angry did not make me ungrateful for the moments when I was also lighter. She encouraged me to find small rituals that grounded me. Morning walks, a journal where I wrote without censoring, and the slow reclaiming of my home, room by room. Work was both an anchor and a trial. Some colleagues were sympathetic, others awkward. There were questions I could not avoid, but I learned to answer them briefly and move on. I stopped changing the topic to protect him. I started having dinners with friends who were genuinely present and did not check their phones at the table. I let Hannah plan small getaways where we did not talk about the past unless we wanted to. The days were not perfect, but they were mine again. One afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a small handmade ceramic bowl and a note from an old friend who had followed the trial. He wrote that he wanted me to have something made by someone who poured care into creating small, useful things. The bowl sat on my kitchen counter like a gentle reminder that there are people who see you and want to help you keep the pieces together. I used it for fruit and later for keys, and sometimes just to hold a folded paper that said simple things like, "Breathe, you are allowed to be happy." Months turned into a year. Mark's probation ended. He sent a message saying he had learned from the experience and asked for my forgiveness. I did not respond. Forgiveness seemed like a gift I could give when and if I chose, not an obligation. The last time I saw him in person was at a mediation session where lawyers sat like diplomats and tried to divide assets and responsibilities without drama. He looked attenuated, like someone who had been hollowed out. I felt nothing at first, then a small, unexpected wave of pity. Not enough to let him back in, but enough to soften the edges of hate that had once kept me company. Revenge, as I had imagined it in the immediate aftermath, was not a dramatic moment of poetic justice. It was quieter. It was building a life that did not include him, and finding strength in simple pleasures. It was turning the pages of a novel instead of scrolling through his old messages. It was laying out clean sheets and sleeping without the weight of deceit. It was laughing at a stupid sitcom with Hannah and feeling the laugh bubble up from my toes. It was taking a pottery class because the clay quieted me. I learned how to make bowls myself. The first one was a lopsided mess, but when it came out of the kiln, fired and brown and imperfect, I felt a small, triumphant joy. I started giving bowls to friends who needed them, each one carrying a little note. There were days even now when memories would come like flashes. The sound of rain on a windshield, the scent of his cologne. A song that used to mean something would make my throat tight. But those moments passed faster these days. They no longer defined me. They were chapters in a book that I was still writing. A year after the accident, I stood in front of a small group at a local community center and told my story for the first time publicly. I had been invited to speak about resilience, about the ways people survive betrayal and rebuild. My voice trembled at the beginning, but then steadied. I told them about the crash, about the lies, about the trial, and about the quiet things that saved me. People came up afterward with hugs, with thank yous, with stories of their own. One woman, older than me, gripped my hand and said, "You did not let them write the end for you." I cried then, but they were the good kind of tears. There is a strange power in being seen for who you are, in telling the truth and letting it land in a room of people who listen. For too long, my life had been a private thing eroded by someone else's choices. Speaking aloud felt like reclaiming a map to my own territory. Sometimes when I passed Mark on the street, we exchanged a nod. No words. He looked smaller than he used to be. Maybe life had taught him something. Maybe it had not. It did not matter. My life was not a stage set for his redemption or his downfall. It was mine. I do not pretend to be a hero. I am just a woman who was hurt and learned to stitch herself back together. I still have scars. I still have nights when I wake up and check the door. But those nights are fewer now, and when they come, I breathe and remember the bowl on my kitchen counter and the small notes tucked under it that say, "Breathe. You are allowed to be happy." If there is one thing I want anyone who hears my story to know, it is this. Betrayal is not the end of the story unless you allow it to be. A person who breaks your trust has taken something precious. You mourn it, you rage, and then if you are lucky, you reclaim the parts of yourself that were lost. You do not have to wait for someone else to judge them. You can live by what you choose to make of the days you are given. The road back was long and uneven, and I will not lie and say there were no setbacks. But the small victories accumulated. A call from a friend to say I had been funny on a bad day. My therapist commenting on my progress. The first bowl I made that was actually round. The quiet happiness of Sunday mornings when I make coffee and sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood wake up. I do not know what the future holds. I do not plan to find out with my eyes closed. I will keep them open and keep choosing every day to live a life that is honest and unafraid.